Chinese have unveiled not one, but two sixth-generation fighters. Now, to me, it sounds a little strange because last we updated ourselves of the Chinese antics, they were still developing fifth-generation capabilities. अचानक ये सिक्स जनरेशन कहाँ से आ गया?
But White Emperor does not resemble anything. The flying wig design has only been seen in a couple of movies or maybe sci-fi novels or stuff like that.
Right.
So it is not a copy. So Chinese must get credit for that. Let's first address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Tom Cruise is not a fighter pilot. He makes us look bad. All right? The real fighter pilots look like this.
Now, this is something that has intrigued me because are we then sometimes not playing into the Chinese hands? I mean, this is what the Chinese want, right? The Chinese want the entire world to be really freaked out, talk about how advanced the Chinese are, etc., etc. And lo behold, that's exactly what we're giving them.
India is generations behind when it comes to China. But remember that China is developing and China is militarizing and modernizing, keeping the US and the ultimate goal in mind, which is hegemony in the world, right? India is focused only on Pakistan and now trying to match China. China is way ahead when it comes to these technologies.
There was a running joke that, it's the probability of us seeing Loch Ness Monster is higher than us seeing the MMRCA in the full glory as we wanted. It was 20 years ago that the Air Force started going to the market for the medium multi-role combat aircraft.
Okay.
And we didn't get it. We just got 36 Rafale.
Okay.
That after so many years of delay.
China has recently made headlines by unveiling not one, but two sixth-generation fighter aircrafts. This unexpected development has elicited a range of global reactions, from surprise and shock to grudging admiration. In India, however, the news has sounded alarm bells, highlighting our persistent challenges in maintaining squadron strength amidst years of decline. We are still entangled in debates over engine development for the Tejas fighter jet, with bureaucratic red tape hampering timely procurements. These critical issues form the core of today's discussion on the print worldview with Swasti. In an increasingly militarized global landscape where conflicts have resurged, from Europe and the Middle East to the Red Sea to Syria, the Indo Pacific, and back to our own neighborhood, India must contend with a rapidly evolving security environment. Threats are becoming interconnected, while our preparedness struggles to keep pace. A key question arises: how much of China's advancements reflect reality, and how much of that is calculated propaganda? The Chinese are masters of psychological warfare, often aiming to unsettle adversaries without direct confrontation. Today, we seek to unravel the truth behind their claims, explore the complex realm of emerging stealth technologies, and critically assess India's position on the global stage. To guide us through these pressing topics, I'm honored to welcome Group Captain Ajay Ahlawat, a seasoned fighter pilot and flight instructor with over 2 decades of experience in the Indian Air Force. Later in the discussion, we will also be joined by the Print's in-house defense editor, Snehesh Alex Philip, to provide further insights into these critical developments. But before I begin there, please tell us a little bit about your own journey and experience as a fighter pilot for the Indian Air Force, with all your international experience, with your staff college. You've done your staff college in the US, etc. You've trained with the Australian Air Force. You've trained with the British Air Force. You've flown Russian aircrafts all your career. You have also commanded a fighter squadron. So please do tell us, first of all, your own journey as a fighter pilot and whatever you feel like telling us. I mean, we are so eager to learn from you, your own authentic experience of flying aircrafts.
Okay, Dr. Rao, first of all, thank you for having me here.
My pleasure.
And a very happy new year to you and all the people watching us. It's a good opportunity for me to speak about myself, the topic that I love the most, and also probably discuss something that you want to hear.
Yes, I'm sure.
I born in a small village in Haryana. That I had to go to Fauj was more or less given because as long as we can remember in our family, people have served in the military in various roles. So early on, I was sent to a Sainik school. From there, the National Defense Academy and the Air Force. The path was more or less clear. Having joined the Air Force, then came the decisions actually, which fleet to choose. The
Right.
fighters became the obvious choice, and I got to fly all the versions of MiG-21, and I was selected to be an instructor, so I did the QFI course. I did
What is
one,
QFI? I mean, you have to please tell our viewers what
the
a QFI.
qualified flying instructor.
Okay, right.
So that allowed me to train young people joining the Air Force. I got to do it once again with the Royal Air Force in UK
Right.
in preparation to bring the Hawk aircraft. And subsequently, I did the mandatory roles of a flight commander from Srinagar Valley, commanded a Hawk squadron, did the ops staff role in the Western Air Command, headquarter Western Air Command.
Right.
3 chances to work with other air forces. Sorry, one is with the Australian Air Force when we did the advanced airpower course, that allowed me to kind of observe closely how they view air power. Is it just a weapon of war, or it's a weapon of justice, or it's a deterrence tool?
Yeah.
That's where we got really deep into jus et bello and jus et bellum.
Yes.
Just
Of course.
war and the
The
just
just
conduct.
war and the yeah.
With the RAF, I really got to see an Air Force that flies the book.
Okay.
They make little rules and they follow all of them.
Right.
With the USAF, when I spent a year in the staff college, I got the opportunity to actually observe firsthand. They really have a world view. They see the entire globe as their playfield. They are not restricted regionally.
Okay.
Because of their presence globally, they think globally. They think of every possible scenario. So I was fortunate for these experiences.
So, but now coming back to the topic that we're here discussing, that Chinese have unveiled not one, but two sixth-generation fighters. Now, to me, it sounds a little strange because last we updated ourselves of the Chinese antics, they were still developing fifth-generation capabilities. अचानक ये sixth generation कहाँ से आ गया? That's one. And the other thing is that did we not know? Did our armed forces, the intelligence community, I mean, did we not know that the Chinese are developing? By definition, by design, these things are big plants where thousands of people work. So why the shock that you observe in the Indian strategic community? Or do you think that, yes, aap log shocked hai, but the people who do the business are not as shocked? I would really want to understand from yourself.
So there are a couple of questions there.
Yeah.
The easiest one to answer is those who need to know, know.
Okay.
Because as you rightly said, these aircraft are not made by 1 or 2 engineers.
Yeah.
A large number of people are employed, including civilian contractors. There are people going in and out of those bases. So those who need to know that this aircraft was under construction for some time.
Right.
But when it flew and they gave it the moniker of White Emperor, it did create a little bit of flutter, because from the time we noticed that it is being made to the time it took first flight is really commendable.
Yeah.
Not even Western Air Forces have been able to achieve all that in such a short time.
Right.
So that was the reason for the kerfuffle, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
The second issue of, is it really a sixth generation?
Yeah.
Well, that question would probably be answered in the times to come, but we have to give the Chinese their due.
Yeah.
This aircraft is flying, it's taken off and landed. This aircraft is domestic. They can scale production when they want. And more importantly, or rather most importantly from my point of view, it's not a copy of anything else that we've seen.
Okay.
When the J-20 came, we said, okay, it looks like F-35, it looks like F-22. But White Emperor does not resemble anything. The flying wing design has only been seen in a couple of movies or maybe sci-fi novels or stuff like that.
Right.
So it is not a copy. So Chinese must get credit for that.
Right. No, I mean, that's true because the Chinese are continuously evolving and innovating, and that it's by itself is something that India should watch out for. But then, since we are discussing generations, right, and that's another thing that I would want to ask you, Ajay, is that, I mean, don't you sometimes get flabbergasted by just how interchangeably people tend to use these kind of words about fifth generation, fourth generation, sixth generation? What is a generation in an aircraft, and then what the hell is the stealth? We all know stealth is a game of cat and mouse, and the vivid imagery in front of all our eyes is, Tom Cruise looking very chic and flying these American fighters, perhaps the F series, and trying to dodge the American radars, and throughout the Top Gun movies. So, I mean, that is the popular imagery of this game of cat and mouse. But having said that, I think there is a whole host of confusion around what generations are. Is there an internationally recognized definition for these generations? And then where does stealth come in? Where does AI, autonomous systems? Please help us understand that a little better.
Let's first address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Tom Cruise is not a fighter pilot. He makes us look bad. All right. The real fighter pilots look like this.
Please take note.
Okay.
Yes, Tom Cruise. I hope Tom Cruise is watching this show, you
No,
know.
no. This issue of generation is important to address because most advanced air forces have doctrines that they publish. Some of them are available in public domain. Some are not. But definition like air superiority, air denial, suppression of enemy air defenses, IADS, etc., they are usually common. Everybody recognizes them.
Right.
But what comprises a generation change in an aircraft, especially a fighter class of aircraft, is not given in any doctrine, but
Okay.
there is some kind of universal agreement amongst the practitioner
Okay.
that what would be called a change in generation.
Okay.
So first of all, why there is a need to call a change in generation?
Okay.
So couple of S's are there. It makes it easy to remember. I should teach my students also.
Couple of S's you said.
S.
Okay.
S
All
as in
right.
Sarah.
Yeah.
So the first aspect is survivability. So a modern fighter bomber, or a combination should be able to survive in a very hotly contested environment.
Okay.
Where the enemy is going to launch a lot of stuff at it and should be able to execute the mission and recover safely.
Right.
So based on the first S, which is survivability, it needs certain things. The first is stealth.
Okay.
Second is super cruise. That is the ability to go fly supersonic speeds in dry power.
Okay.
Then next is super maneuverability, which the thrust vectoring control enables it.
Okay.
And the last two S's are interlinked. One is sensor fusion.
Okay.
So there are a lot of sensors in the aircraft, outside the aircraft, telling the pilot what is going on around the
Right.
aeroplane or how the battle picture is changing.
Mm-hmm.
So a fused sensor picture, networked aircraft that exactly knows what is happening, allows the pilot to obtain a superior situational awareness.
Right.
So all these S's combined make a generation. So the better you get at it, the generation changes.
Right.
So
it is not, if I understand correctly, it is not just stealth, but it is also all of these combined that actually
Yes.
create the generation, right? So when you go from 4 or to 4.5 or 5th or 6th, so basically you're getting better at each one of these aspects, right?
Correct.
If I get it correctly.
So again, let me kind of dispel this little bit of fog here. A 4th generation fighter, when it's upgraded,
Yeah.
like a Mirage 2000 upgraded,
Yeah.
will become 4 plus.
Okay.
But an aircraft that from the shop floor itself was made with certain capabilities like Rafale, it is 4.5.
Okay.
So 4 is different, 4 plus is different, 4.5
and 4.5 is different.
and
Okay.
5 is different.
Okay.
Like in a 6th generation, all these S's that I mentioned would have to be better. Like again, no definition given, but universally accepted fact amongst the practitioner is the 6th generation fighter would have directed energy weapons,
Okay.
would have all aspect stealth, would
Okay.
have a much better sensor fusion and much better situational awareness than the 5th generation aircraft.
Right.
Would have engines. The 5th generation brought in the thrust vectoring, and the 6th generation should have variable cycle kind of engine.
So by that logic then, help me understand, because right now, according to whatever is universally accepted, the most advanced aircraft, fighter aircraft that we know so far, I mean, I'm not getting into the Chinese propaganda and reality, but so far what we know is the Raptor, which is an F-22 Raptor, right?
Correct.
So what the Chinese have now claimed to make, where does that stand?
Okay, so a Raptor is a reality, and White Emperor is a promise.
Okay.
Raptor is the most expensive fighter ever built. It takes $1 billion to operate 2 of them. It costs 400 off the shelf. Then you add weapons, etc. It costs 500 million per piece. So it takes $1 billion to operate 2 of them.
And what makes Raptor really the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world? It is the most advanced versions of these 5 S's that you just told me?
Yes, and also the weapons that it can carry.
Okay.
The longer range of weapon, the smarter weapons it can deploy. So again, as I said, it is survivable.
Right.
It can today take off from a base in Guam, refuel in the air, execute a mission in Chinese mainland, and with a large probability of success return back to the base.
Right.
So and they are so expensive that USAF itself cannot have too many of them.
Okay.
They have capped production. They're not making any more of them because they can't afford them.
Okay. All right. And then now when we have a fair understanding of, what is the stealth technology, how should the generations be understood, now let us come to where is India standing today. And I think even there, I think a lot of viewers would benefit from understanding that, the very basics of, we have fixed wing aircrafts and we have rotatory wing aircrafts. So the rotatory wing aircrafts are basically the helicopters, whether they're attack or transport. And in the fixed wings is where we have the fighters. Now fighters, then we also have bombers, and then we can also have fighters that can double up as bombers, and that's what multi-role is usually. But even then, there is a lot to uncover. And we all know that why we got so miffed in India and why we were somewhere caught on the wrong foot in India when the Chinese news came was because on the one hand, the Chinese are developing and flying the White Emperor. On the other hand, we are still trying to discuss about what is the best engine to go for. And I think it was that contrast that also somewhere explained why we were so, caught, like I said, on the wrong foot. But please help me understand then, Ajay, about where do we stand? How do you place this? We are developing Tejas, which is an LCA, a light combat aircraft, right, which is made by Hull. And then we have 3 versions of Tejas. Each version is going to substitute an aging fleet that we already have. And then we are going to have arm cars. And then we are going to have something else. And we might also have to import. So इतनी भीड़ में आप थोड़ा सा इसको sort करिए. How do we best understand what is happening?
With Dr. Rao, you've thrown a lot of questions there. Let me see if I can get all of them. The first on the numbers actually. At this stage, it looks like the IAF has placed all its eggs in the LCA basket.
Okay.
There are close to 200 aircraft in order. Let me read this out. There are 3 squadrons of LCA Mark 1.
Yeah.
4 squadrons of Mark 1A, that makes it 7.
Yeah.
4 squadrons of LCA Mark 2 and 6 squadron of AMCA.
Yeah.
Amongst this list of 17 squadron, only 3 are visible. The Mark 1 is nowhere near. Mark 2 obviously is still a cardboard. And AMCA is the first flight as promised somewhere in 2028.
Yeah.
Add another 10 years to it be able to kind of get airborne and fight a war for us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see that happening before 2040. I don't know. I mean, what is your assessment? But
other than LCA, the other aircraft, there are no other aircraft that isn't, in reach right now. Navy has some Rafales in order, but Navy has its own fleet air arm requirements.
Okay.
So numbers are at a dangerously low level.
Okay.
The other question on 42, probably we will touch on it later.
Yeah.
But at this stage, we are at the lowest squadron strength ever since independence.
Okay.
So that has kind of caused.
But it's frustrating. Why?
There are a lot of things at play.
Yeah.
One is the Air Force lays out the ASQRs, which are called Air Staff Qualitative Requirements.
Okay.
That they say, okay, without naming a particular fighter, we would want our fighter to have these things.
Yeah.
Such range, such reach, such weapons, such kind of electronic warfare equipment. And based on those ASQR, we go to the international market.
Right.
We also will from now on go to the domestic market and see, okay, is there anybody who can give us this?
Yeah.
And when a couple of people raise their hand, we compare them. Then comes the price comparison, and there is always a little bit of politics and geopolitics thrown in.
Oh no, that's fine. But then, but still, how can we reach such dangerously low levels? Keeping in mind that we are so strategically smart otherwise, we've been consequentially hedging, we've been trying to save India from as many threats as possible. And I mean, why this? I'm unable to understand why a group of such brilliant people, such capable people, are not able to somewhere navigate this depletion and this depleting of squadron strength.
There was a running joke that, it's the probability of us seeing Loch Ness Monster is higher than us seeing the MMRCA in the full glory as we wanted. It was 20 years ago that the Air Force started going to the market for the medium multi-role combat aircraft.
Okay.
And we didn't get it. We just got 36 Rafale.
Okay.
That after so many years of delay. So Air Force has done its part. Air Force has projected the requirement. It's just that our procurement processes are so complex, for the
Yes.
want of better word,
Yeah.
that we haven't been able to
Well,
get
that
them.
is a point because, yes, one of the things that we are now identifying, in fact, if you know that there's a new committee that was made, and everybody made fun of that when that committee came up. But frankly, one of the things that now it has laid down for 2025 is about easing the procurement process, which I think is now a question of survivability, for our squadron strength. Anyway, but very quickly, that also brings me to the question of what about our engines? Why is it? I mean, we have been testing. We want to test. I don't know what stage it is. I think Group Captain Ajay is the right person to answer that. But we have been testing a Kaveri engine, and Kaveri is about 80 kilonewton. That the thrust is about 80 kilonewton. Like that. But what I want to tell the viewers is that the engines that we are now wanting to procure from General Electrics, which is GE 404 version, of that particular, the Americans, right, that we are still waiting for, are also closer to that same thrust. Okay, so that the question that arises is that if we can double down on our efforts to get the Kaveri engine tested and cleared, then we could really significantly enhance our production, especially through Hull, because the production capability for Hull right now is about 18 aircrafts per year. But if we can get the engine tested and we can get new production facilities, I think that can really help us do something about the depleting squadron strength. But anyway, please tell me what is our struggle with the engines and if my reading of the situation is correct or not.
No, you're right that Kaveri is same 75 to 80 kilonewton category, and the
Yes.
404s are similar kind of thrust. We are also looking for 414,
Yes,
the 100
414.
kilonewton,
Yeah,
which will
the bigger
come
one.
from
Yeah.
the Mark II and the
Yes.
MK engines.
Yeah. Mark II, you mean the LCA Mark
LCA
II?
Mark II.
Yeah.
Now on Kaveri, a lot of time and treasure has already been invested.
Yeah.
Some hits, some misses.
Yeah.
Uh, the engine at this stage is working fine, but it's still not ready to be, airframe engine is something like a marriage.
Okay.
You have to be right, because otherwise you'll get into troubles later on.
Okay.
If our viewers remember, there was a fighter program called Marut. It was very successful when it came to the airframe and the weapons, etc. But it was the engine that was the undoing of Marut.
Okay.
So I don't think so it'll be wise to rush into Kaveri before it is ready. We are unfortunately at the mercy of the Americans.
Yeah.
It up to them when can they supply the engines that we've already paid for.
Yes, that's. And by the way, since we are discussing about engines, I also want to understand that this new fighter aircraft that China has unveiled has 3 engines, right?
Yes.
Now, common sense would tell me that why 3 engines, right? Because if there are more engines, then it becomes less maneuverable, and then probably it can't really vertically take off. So, vertical takeoff is this capacity where the aircraft can take off without having to run on the runway. So, how do you then understand that? I mean, why 3 engines? And then does it tell us anything about the Chinese experimentation with their engine technology? And what is it?
Okay, as far as vertical takeoff is considered, it's not an essential requirement for
Okay.
all the forces. US Marine Corps is very keen. We also operated Sea Harriers because of the shorter deck length available to us.
Okay.
And F-22 does not do vertical takeoff.
Okay.
Versions of F-35, which are required by the Marine Corps and certain client states, they require a short takeoff or a vertical takeoff kind of feature.
So we don't really require a vertical takeoff. So that's not really the
right
thing.
now,
Okay.
not in Air Force's kind of scheme of things.
Okay.
The third engine on the White Emperor, I keep
Yes.
referring to it as White Emperor,
Yeah.
is interesting. There is speculation, and I have also made an kind of educated guess on it.
Okay.
So I followed the struggles of Chinese engine makers in their fighter development program. There have been a lot of flameouts because of the missile launch. The air-to-air missile launch, the plume when it gets into the engine is leading to flame out.
Okay.
They have been struggling with it. They have not hidden it. In fact, there's a Chinese movie, which is Chinese Top Gun, called Born to Fly.
Okay. Please take note and let's watch that movie sometime.
They have kind of spent a lot of time in that movie on this aspect alone.
Okay.
So engine that is placed on the back or the dorsal kind of engine keeps it away from the missile plume, especially in case of salvo launch.
Right.
That could be one reason. Other is the third engine is not necessarily required all the time. It could be used for hot, high, humid kind of scenario, like taking off from Tibet Autonomous Region. The altitude is 14,000, 10,000.
Yeah.
So that gets a little bit extra thrust. Or if you're doing heavy, that is you getting airborne with a lot of weapons, it can kick in.
Yeah.
Or once you go on supersonic on the two main engines,
Yeah.
they can throttle down to idles, and the third one, because of design, can better operate between 1.5 to 2.5 Mach.
So it gives us a sneak peek into what the Chinese could be planning, right? I mean,
We will know more in the
yes,
times to come.
right.
But the third engine is interesting. As I said a little bit earlier, it's not a copy of anything that we've seen before.
Right.
It's
Okay.
outright Chinese.
Okay. Okay, so it's a fighter with Chinese characteristics,
Yes.
finally.
Yes.
But I still am tempted to ask you this question, which is that fine, fighters by themselves, like in isolation, don't really complete the picture,
Yes.
right? There also has to be other things. For example, fighter strength, okay, but what about the weapons? You know, where are we getting that from? Then the entire question of interoperability. Okay, I mean, I would like to know your thoughts on that. About how do you look at that? Because interoperability could mean two things. One is a Western concept of IAMD, which is integrated air and missile defense, and which is a very evolved concept because they have different kind of interoperable weapons. We in India do not have that because we have different kinds of weapons. You know, we have some from Russia, we have some from Soviet times. We are creating our own. We are now also getting Western. So in that other sense, it could mean interoperability could also mean an ease of maintenance, ease of repair, and all of that. I mean, how do you understand that? Because in my opinion, and I think Vishnu Som did a very interesting tweet on that, as you can see on the screen, where he said that why we should be getting more interoperable. If we have a certain kind of air defense, let's get a certain kind of fighter. But how do you look at that?
So two issues. One is weapons, and other is the source of procurement.
Yeah.
So they are connected in a sense. If anything, Russia-Ukraine war has taught us
Okay.
is that whatever tables you prepared for the weapons that you're going to need in a war, multiply it by 1,000, and then that will be the requirement for a week. They are literally running through stockpiles of weapons.
Yeah.
Now, special weapons, especially air-delivered weapons, are very expensive.
Okay.
And they also have a shelf life. They have a life when kept in an air-conditioned environment. They have a life when they go for training on the aircraft, and they have a life if you get airborne and don't use them and bring back. Very expensive, very short life. Can't have too many of them.
Okay.
So you can only buy a certain number of them with the hope that the supplier would give it to you when you need it.
Right.
Having multiple sources of weapon is good in a sense that you're not really
Dependent on.
handing over the keys
Yeah.
to one guy.
Yeah.
So if we run into trouble, the Americans, the
Yeah.
other weapons continue to flow in. If you run into problem with French, looks less likely now, but you never know in Europe, then other weapons keep flying.
Yeah.
So it's I think it makes strategic sense
Okay.
to have more than one supplier. And in the ultimate analysis, we'll have to make them ourselves.
Okay.
It is only through domestic production that we can wage a long war like the ones Ukraine has waged against Russia.
Right.
So that's the long game.
And what about these things of, you know, the Chinese are developing capabilities of satellite entanglement, and Chinese are developing the capabilities of manipulating the ionosphere. I think we also need to keep a tab, you know, when especially when you're talking about a strategic direction, okay, of all the modernization and military procurement, about how the Chinese actually plan to wage a war, if at all, because I think the plan is to take the enemy down even before a real war starts. And this is what the communication, all these things, you know, I mean, satellite entanglement, etc., are basically to break into the enemy's communication. So, do you think that we are also aware of it? And if we are we trying to do something about it? Because I guess that's a mind game that the Chinese are playing with us, and also with Americans. Why not? Yeah.
Somewhere around 2000, Chinese decided that they are ready to take the big leap, and they set themselves the target of 2035 when they would be as powerful, if not more, than the United States armed forces.
Okay.
And then the reorganization started. We are still stuck in Jal, Thal, Nab, that is, Air Force, Army, Navy.
Yeah.
They went further. They created 3 more domains: space, cyber, and electromagnetic spectrum.
Yes.
Then they realized if we can't really have the aeroplanes in the air, let's have a rocket force that can neutralize the other guy's airfield.
Yeah.
So they have a large rocket force that would probably launch the first salvo and take out all the airfield that are of concern. So they are thinking in terms of cyber capability. They are thinking of occupying heights in space, as it's called. There are certain orbital positions that if you occupy them, it's equivalent to occupying a height in mountains. So they're thinking of that. and they're also making a lot of advancements in the field of electromagnetic spectrum.
Yeah.
They are well ahead of ourselves. There is no doubt about it.
Okay, and how about the Americans? Because I mean, that's where the US-China great power rivalry also
So
unfolds,
the good thing with
right?
US is much of their policies and developments are in public domain.
Yeah.
Other than the finer details in terms of how much the weapon weighs or how much warhead it carries, the performance criteria is more or less visible to most. Uh, they are a country where there is a lot of kind of answerability to Congress, and
Yes.
we are the Congress to the citizens.
Yeah.
So we know a lot about US. We know a lot about the capabilities they can bring to bear. At this stage, they are far ahead of what
The
Chinese can
Chinese,
do.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's a known fact.
Yeah, okay. So with that, I mean, after this very intensive segment with the Group Captain Ajay Ahlawat, let me now open it and bring in Snehesh, our in-house expert and defense editor. Of course, Snehesh, first of all, welcome, and I'm sure you must be following a bit of what we are discussing here. But I would like to know from you about this propaganda, I mean, that China has been up to, and how the Indian defense, for example, the journalism has witnessed it. I mean, can you tell me how was your experience when I mean, you've been on vacation, yes, we all know, but how was your experience? What was your response to when you learned that the Chinese have unveiled something like this?
Well, thank you so much, Swasti, for having me over, and it was wonderful listening to the group captain. As far as Chinese propaganda is concerned, the fact is that Chinese are known for the propaganda, but the fact is also is that the Chinese have come out with not one aircraft but three different aircrafts. So the Chinese have introduced two fighters and one their new AVAC system, AVAC aircraft that they've come out with. Now, whether you want to call it a sixth generation or whether the final verdict is still out, the Chinese, remember that the Chinese have officially not commented anything on it. Even the
Yeah.
Chinese state media is quoting Reuters and quoting other foreign media of what they are reporting on this fighter. But the fact of the matter is that the Chinese have now introduced two new aircraft, fighter aircraft, which has caught the world by surprise. Now, earlier I mentioned, I heard Group Captain saying that, people who had to know knew. Correct. For example, the latest American, the Defense Department's new report on the Chinese capability had mentioned the fact that the Chinese are working on a sixth generation fighter aircraft. So it's not a surprise, but it is an amazement because the US and the European countries are still working on it, and the Chinese seems to have produced these two aircraft. Whether they are actually whether it kind of a teaser, or whether it was their first flight, or whether they were testing technologies on it, it's the verdict is still to be out because the Chinese have not officially said anything. But it's not just the Indians who were taken in by these two flights, but also the global media as such, and not just the media, but also all defense enthusiasts and military leaders have taken note of what the Chinese have done. It's a tremendous achievement. Contrary to that, I about on the Indian side, and I completely agree with the group captain that the India is generations behind when it comes to China. But remember that China is developing and China is militarizing and modernizing, keeping the US and the ultimate goal in mind, which is hegemony in the world. Right? India is focused only on Pakistan and now trying to match China. China is way ahead when it comes to these technologies. Back to you.
Yeah, and also from your experience, I mean, help me understand, Snehesh, because I really want to understand how the Chinese propaganda has been impacting the Indian response. What about the past unveilings? For example, when the J series came, when the Chinese gave the J series to Pakistan. In fact, if you may be noticing, there was recently a report that said that the Chinese could be given the J-35, 40 of these J-35 aircrafts to Pakistan, and all within 2 years. So I also wish to understand, I mean, when it has come in the past and now in that continuation, what has been the Indian response? How would you view it? I mean, is the frenzy around it? And later on, we found out that the Jays were not really that superior and they ran into trouble, etc., etc. Now, this is something that has also has intrigued me, because are we then sometimes not playing into the Chinese hands? I mean, this is what the Chinese want, right? The Chinese want the entire world to be really freaked out, talk about how advanced the Chinese are, etc., etc. And lo behold, that's exactly what we're giving them. I would like to know from you. Yes.
See, there is no doubt about the fact that there is a lot of propaganda when it comes to China, right? For example, China might claim 100, but the actual reality could be maybe, let's say, 80, right, instead of 100. And this is something that the Indian defense experts and many others, even in the hierarchy per se, they keep saying that the Chinese is a lot of propaganda, you can never trust. And this was a question, there was a top American military officer, one of the topmost officers that come down to India for their official meetings. And I, along with few other journalists, were able to had a closed door session with him to understand the American the American thoughts and how the meetings went by. And this was something that I've brought up, about the Chinese, because the Americans have identified China as a major threat, right? It is the fastest growing navy in the world. It is the fastest growing air force in the world. So when I mentioned this to the American officer, and he's a serving topmost officer, so he replied back saying that, we agree that we cannot trust when it comes to what the Chinese claim. But the fact is that, and we were talking in context of missiles, right? Because they're Chinese developing missiles to take down American aircraft carriers. So he says that, let's say, even if it is 100, instead of 100, it is 80, right? But the fact is that the Chinese have capability to build in such large numbers that any numbers would overwhelm any of the defensive systems that the Americans will have. Forget Americans, that India definitely has. So it will overwhelm. The Chinese have not just Chinese have the ability of numbers. So if you look at the Navy itself, the Chinese Navy, they are coming out with one warship after the other, as if they are coming out, of a cookie cutter, and that's just amazing. So that is why the scale at which the Chinese do it is actually quite scary. Back to you.
Yeah. And then also then brings me to that question of how then you view the procurement bottlenecks in India. You've been covering it for years now, Snehesh, and then it's like it is something which is very flabbergasting, to whether you are a defense scholar, you're a defense journalist, you've been in the Air Force, been in the army, whatever. I mean, if you are basically worried about India's national interest, it would flummox you, right? So please tell me your experience also of why do you think we have these procurement bottlenecks. We know what we require, and yet we are not able to meet the requirements. Yes.
See, I think anybody, forget that defense enthusiast, forget being a defense journalist, forget being even a serving officer or a veteran like the group captain here. Any citizen who will look at India's defense preparedness or at India's defense procurement process, would be astonished to understand, to learn the reality of how it is. Now we're talking about MMRCA. Now this is a 4.5 generation aircraft. This MMRCA contract itself, as the group captain mentioned, was something that was started in early 2000 when the French were offering the Mirage, production line to be shifted to India. And that's when the MMRCA thing, it was for 126 aircraft. Only 36 have been bought. There is an MRFA contract which is up for grabs, which the RFI had been issued, but there is no formal RFP because the entire project is to be formally approved, right? The fact is that our Indian procurement system is so convoluted, and everybody understands that it is convoluted, but nothing seems to be done. Now, how do we respond? And we respond in a typical way our Indian bureaucracy functions. For example, now for the Air Force, they have set up, it's not officially a committee per se because there is no official naming or office note that has been issued. But now you have the defense secretary working along with people from other services, from the Air Force, from the Navy, and from the Army, to understand how the procurement process can be simplified and to understand what the priorities are. And this is just amazing. After all these years, you have the DAC, you have multiple levels, you have now an office of the CDS, and now the defense ministry wants to understand what the priority for the armed forces are. It's actually,
So I
I
think
find
we
it
need
quite.
to, yeah.
I think we need to up our game, and I don't think we can call it by any other name. We need to up our game. There are no two ways about it, frankly. But actually, since we are talking about numbers and everything, that actually brings me back to that question that I'd earlier posed, but we couldn't really answer. And Snehesh, you can pitch in if you want later. But the thing is that where does this magic number of 42 comes? And then if 42, then why not just go on creating LCAs?
Okay, first on the numbers, every equipment that Army, Navy, or Air Force possesses
Yeah.
has to exist on something called as scales of establishment.
Okay.
So there is no scale for 42. There was a committee led by the doyen of Indian aviation, Mr. J.R.D. Tata, formed in early 60s. That
So you mean to tell me that this number of India requiring 42 squadrons at least is coming from the 60s?
no, that committee actually recommended 65,
Okay.
but the government settled for more plausible 45. The note was for 42, and accepted number was 39 and a half.
Okay.
Once again, none of this exists on scales of establishment. It's all on file notings.
Okay.
And somewhere down the road, this number 42 became an article of faith for the Air Force. I mean, all the or most of the senior leadership in the Air Force are fighter boys. It's like they literally bleed blue if you try and reduce that number. So
Right.
42 is an article of faith.
Okay.
And if truth be told, we really need more than that. This,
Yeah, I mean, because
Yeah.
common sensically, if 42, if coming to think of the strategic shift that India has had from the continental domain that we are only looking at Pakistan and China, but now also to the maritime domain, if you look at the Indian Ocean region or beyond, I honestly don't think 42 will stand the test of what we require.
So once again, as the answer is the question is complex, and
Yeah.
the answer would be complex as well.
Yeah.
We are dealing with China, which would soon be, at least in a decade's time, be the largest military power in the world.
Yeah.
We are also growing ourselves, and we are expanding our range and reach to the Indian Ocean region. So either we add more aeroplanes to the Navy, give them a much more stronger or larger fleet air arm, or if we want the Air Force to take care of that, then Air Force would need more numbers.
Right.
That is one. And the second aspect is a lot of stuff that the fighter aircraft did in 60s and 70s can be done by other platforms.
Okay.
Like the Apache helicopters
Yes, it's
can
an
do
attack
the
helicopter.
battlefield air support.
Yeah.
The reconnaissance and surveillance can now be done by satellites.
Yeah.
A lot of strike options can be executed by missiles like BrahMos or Nirbhaya or other stuff, Pralay, etc. that is under various stages of production. Uh, and the other aspect is a Rafale can do what probably 4 or 5 MiG-21s can do. So
Right.
the aircraft itself is more capable. There are other platforms that can do similar roles. Then there is also proliferation of unmanned system
Yes.
that we seem blind to right now. But if we learn only one lesson from the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, that is unmanned autonomous. So that is also something we need to consider.
Snehesh, what is your take on our journey with acquiring the unmanned systems from, especially in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war here? Yes.
Well, the unmanned systems is something which is still a journey, right? Because all the three forces are focusing big on unmanned systems, but the procurement is happening at multiple levels. But I think we'll have to wait and watch for larger procurements and for better unmanned systems to come by. Now, when it comes to, I like to come back to the question on 42 squadron strength. And as the group captain rightly mentioned, the 42 was a number which is there. Now, there is a difference between how the Air Force sees it and how the government sees it, right? The Air Force is looking at 42 squadrons. Now, the government is of the thinking, like how the group captain mentioned, is that, you have now a Rafale fighter, which is equal to 3 or 4 of MiG-21 fighter, right? So do we need the same 4 Rafale fighters, or can we do it against one? So that's one question which is there. Then the government is of the view that you'll have to look at it in the larger game of things. Now, you can't match fighter to fighter. What about air defense? The scale of air defense which has gone up, and do we need to take a fresh look? Like, for example, you mentioned about the reconnaissance ability and strike capabilities which are there, which are being done by multiple other systems. So there has to be a holistic view of how many, one is whether we should look at capabilities or whether we should look at numbers. Whatever that we look at, whether it is capabilities or numbers, the fact is that India is far behind, and we needed fighters as of yesterday. The Tejas is a wonderful program. It's an indigenous program. You have the Mark 1A. Hopefully, at least the delivery will start from this year, 2025. It's already delayed by over a year. I don't know where the Mark II is, when the Mark II is going to come by. Ideally, instead of focusing on Mark II, what the government should have done and the Air Force should have done is Mark 1A straight then to AMCA and the TED BF, which is the naval twin engine deck based fighter. In the meantime, the Air Force should have gone in for the MRFA program, for which it has been pending for long, the numbers are really bad. Even right now, on paper, the actual numbers are 31 squadrons, but in
Yeah.
reality, it is less than 30.
And let's also not forget, Snehesh, and I'm sure Group Captain Ajay will know that better. It's not just about, there is a depletion and a sustained depletion of our squadron strength, but let's also face the fact, the reality that we also have very few fighter pilots. Right? I mean, I think if you remember, Shekhar has done a wonderful cut the clutter on this entire thing about it's not just about not having enough fighters, it's also about having not enough pilots. So we are actually struggling with these things at multiple levels. Okay. And then, very quickly, what do you think about this? The solutions.
Okay, when it comes to pilots, it's simple. We have domestic industry. We can self-produce plenty of them and train them.
Okay.
That can be taken care of in relatively shorter time frame. But when it comes to fighters, we are low on numbers,
Yeah.
as Sneha mentioned,
Yeah.
and there is nothing in sight.
Right.
So that is the problem.
Okay.
There is nothing in sight.
Okay. So what do we do? So, okay, we double down on our efforts to build indigenous aircraft, which we anyway have to do because frankly, there's no getting away from it. But then since time is also a vector here, we have to go into imports? And that brings me to this question of, I don't see the F-35s being either offered to India or India ever going for F-35s. I think right now the choice is very obvious. Do we go for more Russian fighters or do we go for more French fighters? Putting it very plainly and simply. What is your take on that?
So as Sneha mentioned, there are two vectors that look obvious. One is obviously we continue to build
Yeah.
what we're building.
Yeah.
So we should do everything in our capacity
Yeah.
to ramp up production of LCA, various versions. And I agree with him. Let's get rid of Mark II at this stage,
Yeah.
and let's straightway go to AMCA
Yes.
and look at a twin engine deck-based fighter, which could also have an additional or a supplementary role that Air Force could exploit. That is one way to look at it. We have to procure. There are no two ways about it. There has to be some procurement. Unfortunately, even with the best intention, and let me stick my neck out, even if the PMO puts its entire weight behind it, that new fighter is not coming in before 5 years.
Okay.
Because whichever fighter you choose, a good fighter, there's already a line of customers.
There is always a queue. Yeah. The
So
backlog
they're
is
not going
immense.
to get rid of them and give everything to you. They
Yeah.
might give you a 6, 7, or maybe one fighters or one squadron worth 18, 20. That's it.
Right.
So numbers will take a long time to fill.
Yeah.
That remains my concern and
And then
concern of
which one do you think is a better content?
it makes enormous sense to just add more Rafales.
Okay.
We already have the machines, we already have the shops, we already have trained crew.
Yeah.
We just have to kind of ramp up that. So
why not the Su-57s?
It's a new aircraft, and our experience with Russian aircraft has, what do I say, not been as good as the experience with the French Mirage 2000 or the Rafale.
Okay.
So in my opinion, it makes more sense to add more Rafales. They are more expensive. Everybody knows that. It could also be politically very disruptive.
Yeah.
For the current dispensation. But from a military standpoint, it makes sense to just add more Rafales.
And besides, there's also this question of all the sanctions, because we frankly do not know how this is going to play out, and that poses a question on whether Russia is in a state to actually give us all the equipment that we require. Anyway, so that's it. I mean, that's been so wonderful. But then we have a segment, in the end where I'm going to ask the two of you about what are your recommendations. And the purpose of this is that we want this to become the go-to video on the internet for anybody that is wanting to understand and then read up further on this particular issue. So with that, let me first go to Snehesh and ask him what his recommendations are.
So thanks, Swasti, for that, for seeking my recommendation. Now, that's a very tough thing to do, to recommend what, but I think for any reader who really wants to understand how China operates, how China thinks, I think they should start reading the books written by a former Foreign Secretary, Vijay Gokhale, who I by far regard as one of the sane voices when it comes to China. Right, he's been the ambassador there. He understands China very closely. As far as defense handles are concerned, I think these are regular defense handles that I'm sure the readers are already following about journalists and others. But some readings that I do when it comes to China is about, for example, on these latest aircraft. I read stuff on the South China Morning Post covers the Chinese defense very closely. But War on the Rocks is what I would dwell into. Right, they have more detailed analysis of multiple Chinese projects and things like that. So those are things that I keep tap of, and so that's something that even the viewers can keep tap of.
So before I let Group Captain Ajay Ahlawat go, I have to ask him about what are his recommendations for those that are wanting to read up more on the subject. It could be about movies. You could, because the younger generation also has to be roped in, and they are much more friendlier towards the new age media than reading old fashioned books. So yes, what are your recommendations? Any books, movies, any reports, any specific handles? Please go ahead.
Okay, I'll recommend two movies. One I mentioned during the discussion as well.
Yeah.
It's called Born to Fly.
Yeah.
It's English translation of the Chinese movie. It's based on the Chinese test pilots, a bunch of young Chinese fighter pilots
Right.
testing new aircraft and engines. That's one movie. Another movie I would recommend is called Stealth.
Okay.
It's an advanced AI-enabled autonomous fighter bomber, and much of what we see today is already there in that movie.
Okay.
So these two movies I would recommend.
Yeah.
When it comes to books, there are four, in fact, I would mention. The first one is Bombing to Win by Robert Pape.
Okay.
It is very deceptively titled. It says bombing to win, but it makes a very solid argument, factual, based on evidence, why bombing alone can't win you wars.
Right.
And the next is by Claude Felter, Limits of Air Power. We are all, air power zealots. We are ayatollahs of air power. We would like everybody to believe air power and nothing else is required. But Claude Felter goes into detail once again with evidence. What are the limits of air power?
Yeah.
Other is Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell. This tells us what happens when a bunch of senior officers, get married to a concept and they force their way through procurement channels, despite this not being in the greater interest of the service or the nation as a whole.
Right.
And the last one is on the Indian Air Power, a recent book written by Air Marshal Dipendu Chaudhary.
Yes.
These are the four books I would recommend.
So, dear viewer, the key takeaway from today's discussion is the importance of striking the right balance between developing indigenous capabilities and ensuring timely procurements. On the procurement front, especially, expert insights provided by Group Captain Ahlawat suggest that the Indian Air Force is unlikely to favor Russian fighters in its internal assessments. Instead, there is a compelling case for acquiring additional Rafale jets, which would allow for economies of scale in maintenance, repair, and overhaul the MRO facilities and pilot training programs, etc. Similarly, we have to first focus on Tejas Mark 1 and AMCAs instead of developing other variants of Tejas in the interest of time. Simultaneously, it is imperative to intensify efforts to advance the indigenous Kaveri engine project. Expanding production facilities at HAL could significantly boost their annual output, which currently stands at 18 aircraft annually. And this would be great for meeting growing demands. However, the number of fighter jets alone cannot be viewed in isolation. It must be assessed alongside the weapons they carry, the robustness of the weapons inventory, and advancements in communications technology, which is all critical to modern warfare. And finally, none of these measures will bear fruit unless India addresses the rigidity and complexity of its procurement policies. Simplifying these processes is essential to prevent delays that could compromise national security. That's all for today on the Print Worldview with Swasti. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions.